Hi. In my toolkit, I have three main strategies for teaching about social justice. The first is building a reflective practice. The second is creating a classroom community. And the third is culturally responsive teaching. I want to begin this presentation with a quote. All students deserve to have every opportunity to reach their full potential and succeed personally and academically, with access to rich learning experience that provide a strong foundation of confidence that continues throughout their lives. School should be a safe and welcoming place where all students have the tools they need to achieve success and follow their chosen path after graduation, including work, college, apprenticeship, or university. This is from Ontario's Education Equity Action Plan of 2017. In today's diverse and rapidly changing classroom, creating an environment where every student feels valued, respected, and able to succeed is essential. Understanding concepts like social location, social difference, and intersectionality is central to building an inclusive classroom that addresses the unique experiences and identities students bring with them. As teachers, our responsibility is not only to convey knowledge, but to foster equity and social justice by recognizing and supporting the varied social identities of our students. This approach calls for intentional strategies such as building a reflective practice, creating a strong classroom community, and employing culturally responsive teaching that makes space for every student to thrive. By integrating these three strategies, we can cultivate a classroom that actively values and celebrates diversity, encourages empathy and respect, and equips students to navigate and contribute meaningfully to the world. This toolkit has been designed a way for educators to begin with themselves, then to their students through creating a classroom community, through incorporating SEL, social emotional learning, and trauma-informed practices, and then getting to know one's students from that information and incorporate culturally responsive teaching strategies. Reflective practice is a continuous process where individuals examine their own actions, experiences, and decisions to improve their skills and understanding. In teaching, reflective practice involves critically assessing classrooms, experiences, instructional strategies, and student interactions to recognize what worked well, identify areas for improvement, and make intentional judgment for future growth. As John Dewey described, it requires persistent, and careful consideration of beliefs and practices, enabling teachers to approach challenges thoughtfully and adaptively. This practice supports educators in developing self-awareness, fostering a commitment to improvement, and ultimately creating a more effective and responsive learning environment for their students. Maccost and Stain state that a reflective teaching practice helps us make more informed actions so that when we do something that's intended to help students learn, it actually has that effect. Classrooms are an ever-changing environment. Students change, and with that comes generational experiences and new viewpoints. Students bring their life experience into the classroom, and it's really important to subject them to reflection and experimentation based on their experiences. Engaging student-centered lessons and activities can help students to develop a deeper understanding of social and life, and this can be tested inside and outside the classroom with the new experience they have. Tobin, Farron, and Crotty argue that the way we become aware of the assumptions that shape our practice is by examining our actions from as many different vantage points as possible. And he proposes that there are 4 lessons that can be examined in this critical reflection period. The first lens is of the student through the student's eyes, where they are reflecting on our practice. The second lens is through his colleagues' perception of our practice. The third is through personal experience. How is it shaping our practice from our personal experiences? And the final lens is that through theory. So when we read a theory about how we're feeling, this can make us feel more affirmed and potentially have next steps on how to confront our own experiences and biases. Facing history in ourselves states that when teaching for social justice, it's important to begin with yourself. Reflect on your own values and examine your identity and biases and how these might interact and help build or deconstruct relationships with students. The self-examination will be different for white educators than it will be for educators of color. Some ways teachers can practice self-reflection is to write reflection journals, collaborative reflection, incorporate student feedback, practice goal setting, and engage in professional development. Jerome Cranston states that faculties and colleges of education need to embed ongoing anti-racist training and education into their teacher education and leadership development programs for constant self-reflection. To provide some examples for educators to begin to reflect on their discomfort, Dr. Susan Dion states in Introducing and Disrupting the Perfect Stranger, Ask educators to specifically regarding Indigenous peoples to question their understanding of Indigenous history. Where did we learn it? What perspective? Was it white and colonialist or not? They also ask people to distance themselves from the perspective of it does not involve me. Another area to reflect on is gender assumptions. In EdCan's network video for Everyday Practices Gender-Friendly Classroom, it's highlighted that educators must draw on their own assumptions of people's pronouns and reflect on gender-unfriendly content you may have in your lessons, willingly or unwillingly. Creating a strong classroom community is essential. It builds a foundation of trust, empathy, and inclusivity that allows students to feel valued and heard. Through community building practices, teachers can create a space where diverse voices are celebrated, biases examined, and collaborative problem solving becomes the norm. When we take the time to understand our students' interests, we can make connections between the content we're teaching and their real world experiences. Students feel seen and heard by their teachers. They're often more likely to be connected to school and be more motivated to learn. Some strategies that we can use to get to know our students is develop student profiles with input from the students themselves or having information for parents and guardians, including personal goals, cultural backgrounds, academic strengths, and specific accommodations that help them learn. You can also have an all about me assignment where students create posters or presentations that highlight their identities, cultures, families, interests. And at the beginning of each unit, it's really important to have a diagnostic assessment to see where students are at and incorporate their interests in the new material as the unit goes on. It's also recommended to arrive to class a little early and stay a little bit later to chat with students for those kids who feel a little bit uncomfortable talking in class. When making curricular decisions, consider value and build on the diverse prior learning experiences of your students. This can be as simple as getting to know a little bit about every student's background, if they're coming from another school or have an interest in a particular area. Acknowledging and showing that you value your students' opinion and bringing them into the classroom is a very important step for social justice. The first way to promote social justice in the classroom is to create a community of consciousness. Teachers can establish this by creating rules that teach fairness in classroom discussions and behavior. Rethinking Schools highlight that to create classrooms for equity and social justice, teachers must make sure that their teaching is rooted in their students' needs and experiences. All students are to be shown respect. Race, class, gender, and other power dynamics do not inhibit learning. A strategy outlined in Havinsky's article, Intersectionality 101, is to ask students how to make several assumptions and commitments for the purposes of class. Have them acknowledge racism, sexism, classism, homophobia, and other institutionalized forms of oppression, and explain they do exist. Approach this not by blaming, but by taking responsibility and combating misinformation and treating others with respect. There are many different ways for teachers to incorporate and create a classroom community, but there are two outlined in this presentation that I want to talk about: social emotional learning, or SEL, and trauma-informed teaching. SEL is the process in which both children and adults develop the knowledge and self-awareness and personal well-being to build an emotional competency that helps them thrive both academically and in life. There are 5 core competencies. The first is self-awareness. So this is recognizing our own emotions, thoughts. Self-management, which is regulating our thoughts, setting goals and behaviors. Social awareness, which is understanding the perspective of others and showing empathy. Fourth is relationship skills. This is communicating, cooperating, and offering help. And the fifth is responsible decision-making. This is making respectful and ethical choices about personal behavior and relationships we engage in. Casel explains that to best learn, young people need to be surrounded by trusting relationships and environments where they feel safe. This requires making sure that educational policies make sure that they're fair and have caring teachers who believe they can succeed. To fully support all students with SEL, adults need to develop an awareness for student culture and their backgrounds. There is an increased demand for SEL programs to address a diverse cultures, identities, and experience of all students in the classroom, in particular for students of color and other youth impacted by structural inequality. Practices that support culturally sustaining SEL include participatory norm setting and inclusive norms, cooperative and community-based learning, restorative interdisciplinary practices, and the use of multicultural and multimodal instructional strategies. For SEL to be completely and totally equitable, it must also be trauma-informed. By combining principles of trauma-informed practice and high-quality SEL, this aims to establish a really safe place for students who have experienced adversities and trauma, feel welcome and supported, and have agency in your classroom. Things to consider when engaging in trauma-informed teaching is that when working with members of the school community, be aware of events, tasks, and activities that potentially could be a trigger for the students in your classroom. It's important to find ways to provide students with positive and affirming feedback. Meet students where they're at. It's important to know that students who have trauma, they may not be able to identify their feelings and emotions. Give them space. If you feel students may need additional support, connect them with school professionals who specialize in intensive student supports. And rather than jumping to the conclusion of they're a problem, ask yourself, why is this child exhibiting the behavior this way? What are they trying to communicate with me? To build on creating a classroom community, it's important that you recognize that once you create that community, it's as crucial for you to take that information and tailor your lessons and be mindful of your students' experiences through culturally responsive teaching practices. Ontario's Education Equity Action Plan states that students must also experience teaching and learning that is reflective of their needs of who they are. In order to ensure that all students feel safe and accepted and inspired to succeed, schools and classrooms must be responsive to culture. And culturally responsive pedagogy recognizes that all students learn in different ways that are connected to their background, language, family structure, and social or cultural identity. In inclusive classroom education, students must see themselves reflected in the curriculum. Students need to experience teaching and learning that reflects their needs and who they are. To ensure this, educators in Ontario schools practice CRRP, culturally responsive pedagogy, which recognizes that all students learn in ways that are connected to the background that they have. The Ontario Curriculum Human Rights, Equity, and Inclusive Education explains that by knowing who our students are, educators are then able to tailor policies and programs and practices to better meet the needs of their students and provide them with accommodations and specific needs that they have. CRRP involves recognizing that culture encompasses various aspects of their social and personal identity, and educators are encouraged to engage in meaningful inquiry and collaboration with their colleagues, discuss equity issues of particular needs of students that they have. An example where we can deepen our understanding is the historical relationship between Indigenous peoples in Canada and, more importantly, the history of education and Indigenous peoples. Dr. Pamela Toulouse outlines 4 phases of Indigenous education that educators need to talk about. The first is traditional education. This is where elders and cultural teachers worked with children to create a community responsibility. The second is traditional as segregation. This is where residential school era took place. The third is assimilation, and this is where the government continued to run Indigenous peoples' schools, such as Indian day schools. And the fourth is integration. This is where students attend publicly funded schools in towns and cities with non-Indigenous peers. These 4 phases are crucial to dig deep into, as a lot of the time they are not discussed. Annika Guthrie, in her article, By Diggin, You Are Welcome in This Place, explains that educators must commit to learning and unlearning. For this part, educators have not received training and skills necessary in their own educational journey to effectively implement Indigenous pedagogy and perspectives. Guthrie states that, I understand you weren't taught about the beauty and brilliance and complexities of Indigenous knowledges in your own education, but if we want our students to feel, Indigenous students to feel valued in our school and class communities, we need to acknowledge and include their ways of thinking. As teachers, it's crucial we attend workshops, conferences, read books, connect with Indigenous community members, and do our own learning and unlearning to continue to grow and develop our culturally responsive teaching practices. This toolkit was designed as a layered approach to teaching about social justice. This toolbox begins with a self-reflection piece for the educator, making educators examine their own biases in their practice. The self-awareness extends outwards into the classroom, and it can provide a supportive classroom community through SEL, social emotional learning practices, and trauma-informed practices. By building genuine connections and understanding each student, we then can incorporate culturally responsive teaching strategies to meet their needs. Furthermore, through reflective teaching practices, educators can maintain a practice of continuous self-examination and adjustment, ensuring that teaching approaches evolve to meet the needs of their students. With a well-developed social justice teaching toolbook with the classroom, it becomes a space where all students are understood, respected, and uplifted in their educational journey. Thank you.